The way that you've communicated around it seems to accept the characterization of the U.S., which is not based in fact.
Well, it's not helpful to tell the Americans, well, we've only provided you a supply that would kill 9.5 million Americans. That's not a persuasive argument, and I think we should stop using it.
We have a lot of little bits and pieces to the fully formed "you will own nothing and be happy" agenda that is coming into Canada. This is a psyop. There's no other way to explain it. That also might be fresh on my brain because I recently watched a documentary about North Korea. Either way, Danielle Smith schooled Team Canada. I'm at a position at this moment where I actually really don't trust what's going on at all. And am I radicalized? Are you seeing that too? Because I just can't see this in any other light than I currently am. I wish that I could. I wish that what I was seeing wasn't so playbook of exactly how these things have gone down in history. We're going to be talking about all of that. Team Canada is BS. I'm Jasmine Lane. This is Over Opinionated. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment your thoughts down below. And you can also give me a follow on other social media platforms as well.
Workers a decent wage, so they wanted to unionize to get fair wages and to protect themselves, safe work conditions. That is a legitimate thing. And in response, Amazon punished these workers by shutting down the factory. So at a minimum, what we need to do as a country is to send a message. You cannot get away with punishing workers this way. We should absolutely cancel all contracts. The federal government has $120 million of contracts with Amazon. They should be immediately canceled.
The biggest reason why I am triggered by this, and yes, of course, people who work at a company should be treated fairly. But if you go and look at statistics, wages for working for Amazon are not lower in Canada than they are in other places. Amazon is unionized in other parts of the world, Europe, some places in the US, as well as Japan. Some of them are also unionized. But the entirety of this, and I think why I'm so frustrated by it, is because it's like, why does Canada need to have special treatment for everything? And maybe I'm feeling slightly more triggered by this for a multitude of reasons. One of them even being, that bill that came into place about how Canada was demanding that social media networks paid for Canadian content, of which that money that they paid, by the way, was not going into the pockets of content creators. It was going into the pockets of the government, not the individuals working for it. And as a result of this weird demand that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, actually, that's not true. It does exist in Australia, but it's a bit of a different setup there. And they did end up coming to an agreement. But Canada just seems to be incredibly hard to work with on all accounts. And I think the reason why that is because there is, I'm getting conspiratorial, a massive plan to isolate the country as much as possible. And the rhetoric, narratives, ideologies around big business and how those are the really bad guys, so you should trust us, the government, who's the biggest business in the entire country, who has become multimillionaires, all of them. How is it that, a wage in Parliament is $160K a year, yet somehow these people have had their net worths increase into the tens of millions in some cases? Oh, I wonder if maybe that has something to do with the fact that as somebody who reviews policy, you have the ability to change how the market works in the country. You have the ability to get your paws in there and to tell your friends and family, hey, by the way, this is coming. You should invest in that. You should start one of these businesses. How many tens of millions were lost by Canadian officials, elected officials, who joined all of a sudden into these partnerships with personal protective equipment during the pandemic era? And they made millions of dollars. They got millions of dollars in federal grants. That's kind of weird, isn't it? Now, in the case of Amazon, I'm not even remotely suggesting that should employees want to unionize, that they shouldn't be able to try to. That's not what I'm saying. But Canada does have very strict labor laws, especially in Quebec. That's where some of the legal framework is a lot more intense than other parts of the country. And if you have a company that isn't unionized within your country and you want to, and they say, yeah, that's not for us, and they decide to instead pull their operation, that's kind of the risk you take. Is it immoral? Is it contradictory to their policies? Sure. And here's the part that grinds my gears about this, that signals to a greater problem that we have in Canada, I think, which we are definitely getting deeper into in just a little bit here. Jagmeet Singh says, oh no, the government now needs to cancel all of their contracts with Amazon. Screw Amazon, screw the big businesses. Meh, meh, meh. We didn't get what we wanted. Meh. There's already action being taken. The Quebec government is already taking legal action against them. That is justice well served there. And then you're promoting instead to damage our relationships with one of the biggest companies in the world that employs dozens, hundreds, thousands of people in this country in various departments. You want the government to go and cancel everything that they have with them because you didn't get your way. Since when does Jagmeet Singh care about workers? Are you kidding me? Just stop the act already, buddy. We see right through you.
The government of Canada has extraordinary powers at its disposal today to respond to a national crisis. And Donald Trump's aggression against Canadian livelihoods and workers constitutes just such a crisis.
I'm about to go off, by the way, so brace yourselves. But I did want to highlight the fact that CBC played this entire over half-hour press conference that Mark Carney did with no commercials in between, completely uninterrupted. And Pierre Poilievre, who also gave a statement today, was not shown once on CBC. They didn't play any of his press conference. So do with that information as you will, as we get into the deeper topic of the day, which is propaganda.
And make no mistake, we are in a crisis. While America attempts to turn back the clock, Canadians will build sustainability for future generations. This is the time to change. This is our time to build. This is the time for Canada.
These past few weeks have been challenging, but that resilience, that camaraderie we've seen on display has been remarkable. And in the spirit of the Lunar New Year, I've never been more optimistic about Canada's future.
Now, in the midst of all of the Trump talk, the tariff talk, the psyop that's happening to make Canadians resent the United States so that we can yet again further isolate ourselves, Trudeau is apparently hosting a Canada-US summit where he says the event will discuss ways to grow the economy, break down internal trade barriers, and diversify exports. Man, I am just so happy that the Liberal government is suddenly conservative. That's just so cool. You know, that all of these things that we were called so many names for, all of these suggestions and ideas that we were called bigots, you're an ist, you're a phobe, oh, you should be canceled, I'm going to cancel you, we're going to smear your name because you're Team Canada and patriotism is evil, that suddenly now Liberals are on board with, oh, common sense in terms of running a country. Shocker.
There's a fever gripping America. And while it rages, Canadians will remain resolute and true to our values. While America engages in a war on woke, Canadians will continue to value inclusiveness.
Now, Vesci Capello's actually really called out the Liberals, and you got to watch this because it's epic.
Why did it take a crisis of this magnitude to get you and your cabinet colleagues talking like that, about reflecting on the need to further expand our capacity to hit other markets?
Well, look, I mean, we have been expanding our capacity to hit other markets. Our country actually is perhaps the only G7 country that has free trade agreements with virtually all of the other advanced economies. But I would say that it's a bit unfair, I think, sometimes for folks to say things like that.
But your government isn't supposed to be just the rest of us living our daily lives. You're supposed to be thinking about the future. And with great respect, like I've interviewed you a number of times, I don't think anyone would describe you as a champion for building infrastructure to get our product to other markets. Even TMX, the one thing your government spent a ton of money on, did invest to do exactly that. Barely a peep when it opened up. It was difficult to get an interview with anyone to publicize that fact. I think of LNG, for example, and the interviews we've done on that. A quote from you just a number of months ago: the government is opposed to using government money to fund inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. We're the first country in the world to actually do that. We are not interested in investing in LNG facilities. Now it appears that you and your government have had a big change of heart. Why should Canadians trust that? Are you actually genuine about it?
With due respect, Vashti, a number of the things you said there are actually just not true. Certainly, I did champion the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and it actually does exit just adjacent to my riding. So it was certainly something that I worked very hard to explain to British Columbians. In terms of LNG, I mean, we have been supportive of LNG. The LNG Canada 1 is going to be starting up very soon. Wood fiber is being built. Cedar is very close to moving ahead. We are having active conversations on LNG Canada too. Those all have been important things. That doesn't mean that in the context of building fossil fuel infrastructure, you get to conveniently forget about climate.
But you're framing it as someone who's asking you about what your government's position is on getting extra capacity to other markets. You're a climate change denier. I don't think that entered into my question at all. I don't know if people across this country, I certainly have never interviewed anyone out of Alberta or Saskatchewan who has the view that your government was a champion of projects like that. TMX, sure, but there's a whole bunch of other ones. I just read a direct quote to you in which you told me there's no way.
He goes on in typical lib fashion when you are pushed into a corner and the truth is spoken to you, you try to deny it, deflect, lie. And he was very condescending in the remaining interview there, just basically telling Vashti that she's wrong, what she said isn't true, and that the Liberal government has been very active in making sure that Canada is super independent. The worst part, though, is that he then goes on to blame President Trump for the divisiveness and uncertainty that we feel, which I just think is so rich when you consider the fact that for the last 5 years, really, the Trudeau government has been routinely, the phrase maple syrup megas, they have routinely been insulting Donald Trump, insulting their administration, insulting the supporters of them. They have just been insulting everybody. Why? Because, well, he wasn't in office anymore, so they thought that they could, be a big tough guy with no consequences, and they never thought he was going to get reelected. But guess what? He did. And he remembers all of the things that you said, the way that you tried to use him, smear him, in order to prop yourselves up politically and create more division amongst the conservatives in your own country. We remember. The internet lives forever. You should be very careful with the decisions that you make always, because there is a ripple effect always. And speaking of that ripple effect, Danielle Smith was also questioned by Vashti Capellos, and she had some very interesting things to say about the Trudeau government's attempt to dismiss all of these concerns that are causing the Trump tariffs to begin with, as well as some of her comments regarding the next election. A lot of us think, oh, it's 4 years, 4 years, 4 years. Well, no, actually, there is legally a way to push it off until 2026. And if you were listening to Mark Carney in the previous clips that we played, he's very much heightening up emergency. This is an emergency. All of the Liberals, they're threatening our sovereignty. So I initially heard those things and just thought there's no way that they would postpone the election. But the more that I hear that language coming out of the Liberals, the more that I hear them say that they're all standing behind Trudeau and the Liberal Party, the more I'm starting to think that there is a plausibility. While I think it would be disastrous for the party politically, I do think that there's a very real plausibility that they will delay the election now, especially with somebody like Mark Carney. That is their de facto prime minister who they are planting. And obviously he's winning, mark my words, that he's going to get in and he's going to say, this is an emergency, and he's going to delay it.
There will be an election, though, before those negotiations are supposed to start in earnest.
I sure hope so. I mean,
well, there will
as we all know, there is the ability for a new prime minister to try to negotiate a new deal with either the Bloc or the NDP to stay in until October. We also know our Constitution allows for an election that could be held as late as October 2026. I think that would be very damaging to the country. I just want to make sure everyone knows my view. Let's get a new leader in place in the Liberals, and let's get to an election right away. If they win, then we know who is at the table for the next 4 years. If it's somebody else, then let's get that resolved.
You spoke over the weekend and released a statement when the initial executive order was signed, basically intimating that your lobbying efforts in the United States had led to a better outcome for oil and gas because energy got a 10% tariff instead of the 25% tariff. What do you tell your province's farmers or manufacturers? Were you not advocating for them?
I was advocating for everyone. I think we were very successful in making the argument about energy resources. And let's remember that the definition of energy resources is very wide. It's oil, gas, electricity, critical minerals, uranium. So every single province benefited from the recognition that the Americans need that. I think we can make similar arguments on food. I think whether it's cattle or whether it's grains, I think that goes into an American supply chain that adds value added, and it's the exact same argument. I think the same could be made for auto parts. The fact that auto parts go back and forth across the border 6 or 7 times to create a finished car, that's a very strong argument to maintain those supply chains. So it's up to each premier to make those arguments.
But yes, Canada, Danielle Smith, she is certainly a traitor. Such a traitor that the Liberal government is even using some of her suggestions on how to appease Donald Trump after she took the time to go meet with him. That's how big of a traitor she is.
Is it your intention, though, over the next month to advocate for all those other areas that you talked about? Because I think Canadians have an impression that, some premiers are advocating for something, others are advocating for other things. There's somewhat of a federal voice unifying everything, but not really at all the time. Could you be blunt with Canadians? Is it your plan over the next 30 days to advocate for a pause writ large, or will you continue to focus solely on energy?
I've never been focused solely on energy. I've always focused on this special trading relationship we have as a reason for Canada as a whole, every province, all products, to be able to go across the border tariff-free.
And for those of us who have actually gone to the lengths to watch Danielle Smith, to read what she is doing in all of her statements, we know this. But why is there a sentiment amongst Canadians that is not what's happening? Oh yeah, propaganda. That seems to be the theme of this episode. This propaganda that lies, manipulates, misleads, and makes everybody resent each other.
I don't want to get distracted on the economic arguments without understanding that we have to address the issue of fentanyl deaths. When I talk to members of the administration, they're very aware that 75,000 Americans a year die of fentanyl. We have a fentanyl overdose problem in Alberta that we've been tackling for 6 years. So let's work together to try to stamp that out for good. And then we can get on to talking about the economic arguments later.
But the issue of fentanyl is not one that happened overnight. And I think we've talked before about not to take away anything from obviously the poisonous supply and the impact it's had on both Canadians and Americans' lives. But the data from border authorities in the U.S. clearly shows that our border, when it comes to fentanyl, it's a fraction of the seizures that are happening overall at both borders. Were you making those points when you were talking about the border? Because the way that you've communicated around it seems to accept the characterization of the U.S., which is not based in fact.
Well, it's not helpful to tell the Americans, well, we've only provided you a supply that would kill 9.5 million Americans. That's not a persuasive argument, and I think we should stop using it. I think we need to understand Canada's problem is different. Canada had a big problem with TD Bank acting as a money launderer. They got a $3 billion fine. We've had our casinos in British Columbia act as money laundering. We have the issue of not actually examining containers when they come in on our ports. We don't examine every car that comes across the border. We have cars being stolen and stuffed with drugs and sent outside of Montreal ports. We've got packages coming across the border through Amazon that go unchecked. So just because we haven't found it, maybe it's because we don't have the processes in place to be able to find it. Maybe that's what the Americans are raising. And now we have an opportunity to address that because our people are dying too. And we shouldn't be complacent about that. We should want to work with them in our own interest to be able to stamp out the cartels as well.
Now, I don't know about you, but Danielle Smith here has been making a hell of a lot of sense to me in terms of a very real crisis that we ourselves are in, that our government has not taken seriously until the hammer that is Donald Trump said, please work on that. And now they're like, okay, we will. So Danielle Smith does this interview on CTV News. And in case your own social media algorithms are not showing you just how divided this country is, not because of Trump, because of our government, here's some of the comments on it. Here's how this was interpreted by those whose brains are so far gone, they have nothing left but our prayers to hopefully save their souls at this point. Tishy Girl says she's a threat to Canada's democracy, an intel risk. And another one from Disordered. That's a pretty valid username, I'd say. Instead of standing up for Canada, Premier Smith just wants to surrender to Trump and his lies. Danielle Smith is on Team Trump. I really am just so off put by, I'm confused by Canadians who are absolutely pro-crime, pro-narcotics, pro-deaths. What has happened to this country? Like, you are so pro-deaths and crime that you would rather spew out this nonsense than bend the knee to a guy that you've never even met, that you've just decided you don't like because of things you've seen on the internet by other people who don't like him? Really?
That takes away completely from the factual basis. Like, he wants to punish us in the same way he's punishing Mexico, predicated on some sort of pretext around the border when it doesn't exist in the same way. Why don't you want to make that argument at all?
He wants us to recognize that Canada enjoys a very special relationship with the U.S. that no other country in the world enjoys, and just show the respect of taking seriously the fact that they've got people dying and they want it to stop. That's it. We should stop making excuses, stop saying, yeah, but we're not as bad as the other guys. We should just say, yes, we agree. And we're going to take care of our part of the issue so you don't have to worry about us anymore. So that's all I would say, is that what he's observing is that things are a lot worse than they were last time he was in, that things are going in the wrong direction. We've got to reverse that. So I would say no excuses. Let's just work on that. And then hopefully 30 days from now, we'll have made enough progress that we can move on to some of the other issues.
I'm Jasmine Lane. This is Over Opinionated. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment your thoughts down below, and give me a follow on other social media platforms as well.